Why the narcissist is always watching. The narcissist is lurking out there, somewhere, watching you, observing, assimilating, collating. Might they be there across the street, binoculars trained upon your bedroom window, waiting to see you as you walk around in the sanctity of your home? Perhaps they're following you as you're driving home, waiting outside your workplace for a glimpse of you. Always watching and waiting, monitoring your social media posts, talking to people to find out what you have been doing. That is what the narcissist is doing, isn't he? Always watching you. Actually, the answer is no, he is not. The narcissist will engage in some observation of you, of that there is no doubt, but the suggestion that the narcissist is always watching you is incorrect. It's important for you to realize this, both in terms of enabling you to understand the steps that you need to properly take with regard to beating the narcissist through your no-contact regime, and also removing some of the idiotic myths that are propounded about our kind, in order to actually give you assurance. I often explain to my clients in consultation that part of this process is it's just as much knowing what doesn't happen as does happen, what you can't do as much as what you can do, so that you don't waste time going on a fool's errand, and that you don't become unnecessarily concerned by matters which aren't actually going to happen. It is, of course, the case that some narcissists will stalk you, following you down the road. Some will look at what you're posting on social media. Some will drive past your house to see what you're up to. Some may go around asking questions about you. Some will loiter outside work. All of that is part of hoovering. But to say that the narcissist is always watching you is incorrect, and you should understand this. Let's take, for example, that you're a secondary source to a narcissist. If you're an intimate partner secondary source, you're of pretty decent importance to the narcissist in terms of the potency of your fuel, the provision of character traits, and potential residual benefits. A non-intimate secondary source of moderate importance. The narcissist isn't always watching what you're doing. You are a shelf appliance, whether you're intimate or non-intimate. The narcissist picks you up off the shelf, deals with you for a period of time, and then pops you back on it. When you're on the shelf, it's as if you don't exist. The narcissist isn't thinking about you. Of course, the narcissist may give the impression that that is what is going on with regard to the things that they say. But that's just another form of asserting control over you. So, for example, during a benign period, the narcissist that is dealing with you in a benign method will say, "I'm always thinking about you." No, he's not. When you're not with him, he doesn't think about you at all. Yes, you might pop into his head, or you might pop into his head as a consequence of him being reminded of something, but he doesn't sit there thinking about you over and over again. But of course, when he takes you off the shelf, he'll tell you that he does, because it sounds good. And his narcissism compels him to tell you that lie, so that you are made to feel special, so that you submit to his control in the instant, and you provide him with fuel. But when you're not there, he'll be dealing with somebody else. When he claims, "I'm always thinking of you even when I'm having sex with my wife," believe me, he's not. He's thinking of his wife, because she's the one that's providing him with fuel, and you as the mistress are completely forgotten about. But his narcissism recognizes that if he told you the truth of that, that would threaten his control over you, and therefore he tells you the lie instead, that you are always in his thoughts, that he's always thinking about you. And this, of course, bleeds into other areas of the narcissistic dynamic to cause victims to believe that the narcissist is always thinking about them and therefore is always watching over them. Furthermore, the narcissist doesn't do it because they don't need to. When you are placed on that shelf, the narcissist engages with a different appliance. And For the majority of narcissists, lesser and mid-range, they in effect eat what they kill. What's placed in front of them they deal with, and everything else is forgotten about because they operate moment to moment. So when the narcissist is dealing with friend A, friend B is forgotten about, and then friend B comes on the radar, and if the circumstances are ripe for hoovering them off the shelf, that's what happens. And the narcissist might deal with friend A and friend B at the same time, meaning friend C isn't dealt with. They're not always watching what friend C is up to. It isn't necessary. They don't need to assert control over them. They don't need to obtain fuel from them. They're off the map. They're dealing with A and B. Similarly, where you are the mistress to that narcissist, when he's dealing with you, he gains fuel from you and asserts control over you, gains those character traits and residual benefits. Then you're popped back on the shelf, and you're forgotten about. Yes, you might get a comfort crumb text from him. That's because you popped up in his head and his narcissism suggested, send a comfort crumb, make her feel special, but keep her on the shelf. He thought about you, and then he doesn't. He's not watching to see what you're up to. He's not monitoring it. Of course, there will be instances applicable to the secondary source or the primary source where if something happens which threatens the narcissist's control of you, the narcissism causes him to take action such as looking at your social media to find out what you're up to find out what's being said, to find out who you might be interacting with. It compels the narcissist to drive past your house or hang around outside. But those steps are part of hoovering. And the narcissist, of course, operating through grandiosity, will issue such threatening things where, particularly mid-range, and sometimes lesser, I'll always be watching you. But he won't. Remember, I can always see what you're doing. Because the imposition of that threat allows the narcissist to assert control in the now, and panders to the sense of entitlement and grandiosity of the narcissist, of this omnipotent being. But the fact is, the lesser and mid-range narcissist neither has the energy level, the resources, and most of all, the necessity to keep engaging in that behaviour. There will be instances where you will experience repeated hoovering from the narcissist, and that is because there has been a hoover trigger, possibly caused by you, or possibly caused by you entering the sixth sphere of influence, namely, the narcissist just thought about you, the narcissist was reminded of you by somebody else, or the narcissist was reminded of you by something, and then you get hoovered. That doesn't mean the narcissist is always watching you. It means, in that instance, you, perhaps by sending a text message, or because you entered the sixth sphere of influence, as I've just explained, came up on the narcissist's radar, the narcissism needed to assert control over you, so you were hoovered. And that might be that the narcissist comes and stands outside of your property, and he's watching and waiting. And he might come back the next night because there's been a hoover trigger which has compelled him to hoover you again in that way. But this will not continue forever and a day. He is not monitoring everything that you're doing because he has to do other things. He has to do the rudimentary aspects of life like earn a living, do the laundry, but he also has to go and get fuel from other people because particularly if you're not providing it, because you're in essentially no contact, the narcissist can't keep monitoring you with no reward. He will create the impression that he's always watching you, but he isn't. Furthermore, of course, what can occur is your emotional thinking plays on your paranoia, causing you to believe that the narcissist is somewhere out there with a telescope or binoculars, is creeping around, rooting through your rubbish bin, finding out what you've been up to, is lurking, poring over everything on your social media profile. Your emotional thinking, remember, wants you to feed your addiction, and one way to do that is to use fear against you, to have you fearing that the narcissist is this Terminator-like beast that's intent on your destruction and is going hell for leather to monitor everything about you. This is not the case, but your emotional thinking doesn't care about that. And of course, the idiots that pump out information suggesting that the narcissist is always watching you feeds into that difficulty, that your fear gets hold of it, driven by your emotional thinking, so that you keep thinking about the narcissist. And if you keep thinking about the narcissist, you feed the addiction. And if you then are occasioned to talk to your friends, fearing that the narcissist is always out there somewhere monitoring and watching what you're doing, you feed the addiction even further. Lesser and mid-range narcissists neither have the funds, resources, time, energy, or ability, and most of all, don't have the need to be watching you all of the time. In certain instances, if you have the misfortune to have been ensnared by a greater or an ultra, we have the capability to do this. But we won't be doing it ourselves. We will contract it out to somebody. You will be put under surveillance by an individual, and in those instances, the narcissist is, through somebody else, always watching you. But this tends to be more utilised by the greater and ultra with regard to those where there are military, business, commercial interests, not necessarily the romantic. It can happen, but most of the time it does not. And greaters and the ultra are extremely rare, so for most of you, the narcissists you will have been involved with are lesser and mid-range ones. And there will have been some monitoring of you. I'm not saying that it never happens, of course it does, but it is not the constant watching of you that is the idea that is created, for the reasons that I have already explained, that it cannot and need not happen. The narcissist needs to get a reward, an outcome from what is going on. And if the narcissist hangs around watching and you come out and say, "Fuck off, stop hanging around," it's challenge fuel, but you've given some fuel, and it will encourage further hooverings. But if the narcissist gets nothing from you, then next time that you come up on the radar, they're less likely to hoover, meaning that this apparent monitoring is less likely to happen. That's the logic of the situation. That's what's actually occurring. The narcissist can ill afford, as a consequence of the lack of access to the relevant resources, including, of course, time and their fuel needs, to sit around in a car round the clock on a stakeout outside your house. It just isn't practical and flies against how the narcissism operates. It's actually far easier to go and get fuel, character traits and residual benefits from somebody else in the fuel matrix than to remain preoccupied with you. Yes, the narcissist might, as a part of the initial Grand Hoover, keep hoovering you, keep coming back, keep trying to draw you back in. But this doesn't mean that the narcissist is always watching. There may be, as a consequence of a particular hoover, that they set themselves up in surveillance for a short period of time, and then are forced to move on to do something else. There might be a number of successive hoovers in the same day, which give the appearance of round-the-clock monitoring. But that isn't what is happening, and as I've explained, your emotional thinking isn't helping you in that regard. It causes you to think that certain things which are nothing to do with the narcissist are something to do with the narcissist keeping tabs on you. I often explain to my clients that because the vast majority of you deal with lesser and mid-range narcissists, your emotional thinking causes you to give those narcissists far too much credit, and they are not the capable creatures that people often believe them to be. It's an honest mistake. The fact is this: narcissists will monitor you to a degree. It comes as part of the hoovering for the reasons that I've explained. The greater and the ultra may well engage in persistent surveillance, utilising their resources for a greater aim to put that in place, but they won't be doing it. We won't be doing that. We'll have somebody else doing it. But the majority of narcissists aren't in a position to be able to achieve that, and they don't need to. It doesn't pander and cater for their need for assertion of control in the moment and the acquisition of the other aspects of the prime aims. So instead, they will do it intermittently. They might give the impression of doing it all of the time as part of their grandiosity and threat, or you might gain the impression that it is occurring all of the time as a consequence of the workings of your emotional thinking. But what you should take away from this is the narcissist is watching some of the time, but it's far less often than you actually realise. And, once again, the myth of the narcissist always watching has been given the Tudor treatment. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.